Did you know that 40% of the most significant hominid fossils ever discovered come from Ethiopia's rich paleontological sites? Or that genetic evidence points to this exact region as the birthplace of anatomically modern humans roughly 200,000 years ago? Ethiopia isn't just a country with an interesting past, it's where your story began. In this documentary, we follow the complete human timeline from the earliest evolutionary branches to today's complex nation. We'll witness the transition from hunter-gatherers to the sophisticated kingdom of Aksum, through medieval Christian dynasties, imperial conquests, revolution, and the ongoing struggles that continue to reshape this ancient land. The story of Ethiopia begins not with kingdoms or empires, but with our earliest ancestors who walked these lands millions of years ago. The Great Rift Valley cutting through Ethiopia has preserved an extraordinary record of human origins, making this region one of the true cradles of humanity. Paleontologists working in Ethiopia have uncovered fossils spanning nearly the entire human evolutionary timeline, offering windows into our distant past that exist nowhere else on Earth. In 1974, a discovery in the Afar region changed our understanding of human evolution forever. There, researchers found a partial skeleton of a female hominid who lived 3.2 million years ago. Lucy, as she became known, belonged to the species Australopithecus afarensis. Her remains revealed a creature that walked upright but retained some ape-like features, representing a critical transitional phase in our evolution. Lucy wasn't alone. Other Australopithecus fossils found throughout Ethiopia show these early hominids thrived here for hundreds of thousands of years. But Ethiopia's significance extends beyond bones. At Gona in the Afar region, archaeologists discovered the oldest known stone tools on Earth, dating back 2.6 million years. These simple, revolutionary implements, sharp flakes struck from stone cores, mark humanity's first technological innovation. The beings who made these tools were experimenting with ways to process food more efficiently, showing the early stirrings of human ingenuity. More sophisticated Acheulean tools appeared, including carefully shaped hand axes that required planning and precise motor skills to create, suggesting growing cognitive abilities among our ancestors. Around 100,000 years ago, anatomically modern humans, people essentially identical to us, lived throughout Ethiopia. Genetic and fossil evidence suggests these Ethiopians were part of the population that eventually migrated out of Africa, spreading across the globe to become the ancestors of all non-African peoples today. This makes Ethiopia not just the birthplace of humanity, but the source of our species' worldwide journey. As the last ice age ended around 12,000 years ago, Ethiopia's inhabitants began a remarkable transition. Communities in the highlands domesticated native plants like teff and ensete, creating some of Africa's earliest agricultural societies. These Neolithic farmers established permanent settlements, developing the social organizations that would eventually give rise to more complex societies. By the first millennium BCE, Ethiopia contained a diverse mosaic of cultures. The Agaw people occupied much of the central highlands, while communities along the Red Sea coast interacted with traders from southern Arabia. This cultural exchange led to the emergence of Ethiopia's first state-level society around the 10th century BCE, the Kingdom of Ahmad in today's Tigray region. Ahmad represents a fascinating blend of indigenous African and South Arabian influences. Its people constructed stone temples, developed irrigation systems, and worked iron, one of Africa's earliest examples of iron metallurgy. They also used a writing system based on South Arabian script, though linguists haven't fully deciphered their language. The inscriptions remain partially mysterious, containing words we can read but cannot entirely understand. Archaeological evidence suggests Ahmad was more influential than previously thought. Traces of its trading networks extend across the Red Sea to Yemen and possibly as far as Egypt and India. Ivory, gold, and obsidian from Ethiopian highlands traveled along these routes, exchanged for luxury goods and new technologies. This forgotten commercial network operated centuries before the more famous Kingdom of Aksum would emerge in the same region. Ahmad lasted approximately 5 centuries before fragmenting into smaller political entities around 500 BCE. Its dissolution remains poorly understood, but its legacy laid the groundwork for the rise of Aksum, which would transform Ethiopia from a collection of small states into one of the ancient world's major powers. The trading relationships and cultural foundations established during the Ahmad period provided the essential infrastructure for Ethiopia's emergence onto the world stage. As the fragmented kingdoms of Ahmad faded into history, a new power emerged in the northern highlands of Ethiopia around the 1st century CE. The Kingdom of Aksum gradually consolidated control over the region, transforming from a small city-state into one of Africa's most influential ancient empires. Unlike its predecessor, Aksum developed a sophisticated political structure with a powerful monarch at its center, backed by a complex administrative system that collected taxes, organized labor, and maintained a standing military force. What made Aksum truly exceptional was its economic innovation. The kingdom became one of the few African states to mint its own currency, producing gold, silver, and bronze coins that facilitated both domestic and international commerce. These coins featured royal portraits and Greek inscriptions, reflecting Aksum's cosmopolitan connections and commercial ambitions. The use of Greek wasn't accidental. It served as the international language of trade, making Aksumite currency recognizable to merchants from the Mediterranean to India. The most visible symbols of Aksumite power were their monumental stelae, massive obelisks carved from single pieces of granite, some reaching heights of over 30 meters. These engineering marvels mark the tombs of Aksumite royalty and showcase the kingdom's technical capabilities. Workers quarried enormous stone blocks, transported them over difficult terrain, and erected them with precision that still impresses modern engineers. The largest stela, which eventually collapsed, weighed over 500 tons, a testament to Aksumite ambition and organizational capacity. Aksumite architecture represented a unique fusion of indigenous African, South Arabian, and Mediterranean influences. The elite constructed multi-story stone mansions with wood interiors, while religious buildings incorporated elements from across the trading world. Archaeological excavations have uncovered the remains of impressive palaces featuring multiple rooms, drainage systems, and stone foundations that support wooden superstructures, signs of a sophisticated urban culture. Geography played a crucial role in Aksum's rise to power. The kingdom controlled the highlands overlooking the Red Sea, allowing it to dominate trade routes connecting Roman Egypt with India, Arabia, and East Africa. Aksumite merchants facilitated the exchange of ivory, gold, emeralds, and slaves from the African interior for textiles, spices, and manufactured goods from Asia and the Mediterranean. The port city of Adulis became a bustling commercial center where goods from 3 continents changed hands, generating substantial tax revenue for the Aksumite crown. Foreign visitors described the capital city of Aksum as an impressive urban center. The 6th century Byzantine traveler Cosmas Indicopleustes noted its large stone buildings, bustling markets, and diverse population that included merchants from across the known world. Archaeological evidence confirms these accounts, revealing a planned city with distinct quarters for commercial, residential, and administrative functions, unusual sophistication for sub-Saharan Africa in this period. Aksum's emergence wasn't accidental. The kingdom filled a power vacuum created by the decline of the Kushite civilization to its west and the weakening of Roman control over the Red Sea trade routes. The Aksumites strategically exploited these changes, expanding their influence through both military campaigns and diplomatic relationships. At its height in the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, Aksum controlled territories spanning modern Ethiopia, Eritrea, Djibouti, Yemen, and parts of Sudan and Somalia. The kingdom's international standing is demonstrated by a remarkable historical detail. A Persian document from the 3rd century CE listed Aksum as one of the world's 4 great powers alongside Rome, Persia, and China. This recognition reflects Aksum's genuine importance in ancient geopolitics, though it remains largely overlooked in Western historical accounts. Modern technology continues to reveal Aksum's true intent. Recent satellite surveys have identified hundreds of unexcavated archaeological sites throughout the Ethiopian highlands, potential Aksumite settlements, outposts, and religious centers that may significantly expand our understanding of the kingdom's boundaries. These hidden sites suggest Aksum's reach extended far beyond its known core, connecting vast territories through networks of trade, religion, and political influence that archaeologists are only beginning to understand. In the early 4th century CE, a young ruler named Ezana ascended to the throne of Aksum. His reign would permanently alter Ethiopia's religious landscape and set the kingdom on a path that would define its identity for the next 1,700 years. Like his predecessors, Ezana initially practiced the traditional Aksumite religion, a polytheistic faith that worshiped deities like Astar, a sky god, and Mahrem, a war god. The early inscriptions from his reign invoke these traditional gods, showing his initial adherence to ancestral practices. The transformation of Ezana's religious views can be traced to an unusual source, a shipwrecked Syrian Christian named Frumentius. According to the accounts recorded by the 4th century church historian Rufinus, Frumentius and his brother Odysseus were traveling on a ship that stopped at an Aksumite port. Local people attacked the vessel, killing everyone except the 2 brothers, who were taken to the royal court to serve as slaves. Frumentius became a tutor to the young Ezana and gradually introduced Christian ideas to the future king. When Ezana took power, Frumentius traveled to Alexandria, where Patriarch Athanasius appointed him as the first bishop of Ethiopia. Returning to Aksum with official religious authority, Frumentius, now called Abba Salama, or Father of Peace in Ethiopian tradition, convinced Ezana to embrace Christianity around 330 CE. This conversion predated the official Christianization of the Roman Empire, which occurred decades later under Emperor Theodosius I's Edict of Thessalonica in 380 CE. The evidence of this religious shift appears in Ezana's royal inscriptions. Earlier texts invoke traditional gods, while later ones begin with phrases like, "In the faith of God and the power of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit." This dramatic change represents one of history's clearest records of a ruler publicly abandoning established deities in favor of a new monotheistic faith. The currency of Aksum similarly transformed, with early coins featuring crescent and disc symbols, while later issues prominently displayed the Christian cross. What makes Ethiopia's conversion particularly significant is its independence from Roman imperial influence. Unlike European kingdoms that adopted Christianity through Roman expansion, Ethiopia developed its own distinct Christian tradition. Frumentius represented the Alexandrian Church, not Rome, creating a direct connection to Egyptian Coptic Christianity that would shape Ethiopia's religious development for centuries. Ezana's adoption of Christianity didn't occur in isolation from his political ambitions. During his reign, Aksumite forces conducted successful military campaigns against neighboring Nubia and expanded control over parts of the Arabian Peninsula. The new religion provided ideological justification for these conquests, portraying Ezana as a divinely sanctioned monarch spreading the true faith, a political tool that Ethiopian rulers would use for centuries afterward. The Christianity that took root in Ethiopia developed unique characteristics that distinguished it from other branches of the faith. Rather than erasing indigenous traditions, the new religion incorporated elements of local culture. Ethiopian Christianity maintained practices with apparent Jewish influences, such as dietary restrictions and Sabbath observance, while developing distinctive artistic and architectural styles, liturgical music, and religious literature in the Ge'ez language. A remarkable trilingual inscription from Ezana's reign, written in Ge'ez, Sabaean, and Greek, still stands in the ancient capital, providing physical evidence of both his conversion and Aksum's cosmopolitan connections. This monument represents one of Africa's oldest Christian artifacts and demonstrates how the new faith existed alongside the kingdom's multicultural traditions. Ezana's religious transformation established a precedent that would define Ethiopian identity through centuries of change. Future emperors claimed legitimacy partly through their role as Christian monarchs, tracing their religious authority back to Ezana's conversion. This Christian identity would help Ethiopia maintain cultural continuity and independence, even during periods of political fragmentation, becoming a unifying force that transcended regional and ethnic differences across the Ethiopian highlands. While Aksum's military power and religious transformation under Ezana established its political importance, the kingdom's true strength came from its position as a commercial nexus connecting three continents. At the height of its power from the 3rd to 6th centuries CE, Aksum functioned as a trade superpower, strategically positioned to control the flow of goods between Africa, Arabia, and the Indian Ocean trade networks. The port city of Adulis served as Aksum's primary commercial gateway. Located on the Red Sea coast in modern Eritrea, Adulis handled vessels from across the known world, Roman ships from Egypt, Indian merchants from the Malabar coast, and Arab traders from Yemen, all gathered at its harbors. Archaeological excavations at Adulis have uncovered remains of warehouses, markets, and residences that once housed a diverse population of traders, sailors, and customs officials who facilitated this cross-cultural commerce. Aksum exported a range of valuable commodities from the African interior. Merchants transported ivory from elephant herds in the Ethiopian highlands and Sudan, gold from mines in western Ethiopia, frankincense and myrrh from the Horn of Africa, as well as exotic animal skins, rhinoceros horn, and live animals for royal menageries. The kingdom also participated in the slave trade, selling captives from military campaigns to foreign buyers. In exchange, Aksumite elites imported luxury goods like Chinese silk, Indian spices, Egyptian glassware, and Byzantine jewelry, items that marked their status and wealth. The empire's commercial importance led to formal diplomatic relations with distant powers. Byzantine records document Aksumite envoys at the imperial court in Constantinople, where they negotiated trade agreements and military alliances. Roman historians, including Procopius, wrote about Aksum's economic power, describing it as a crucial link in international trade. These diplomatic connections elevated Aksum's status beyond that of a mere regional power to a recognized player in international politics. A key factor in Aksum's commercial success was its monetary system. The kingdom minted high-quality gold, silver, and bronze coins that maintained consistent weight and purity standards over centuries. These coins facilitated trade by providing a reliable medium of exchange accepted throughout the region. More importantly, they allowed Aksum to engage directly with other monetary economies like Byzantium and Persia as an equal partner rather than a subordinate. Aksumite coins have been discovered as far away as southern India and Sri Lanka, physical evidence of the kingdom's extensive trading networks. The timing of Aksum's rise coincided with significant disruptions in other trade routes. The decline of Meroe in Sudan and periodic conflicts between Rome and Persia that disrupted overland trade through the Middle East created opportunities that Aksumite merchants exploited. The kingdom positioned itself as an essential alternative route connecting East and West, becoming what Roman merchants called India's middleman, the crucial link that kept goods flowing between Asia and the Mediterranean. Aksum's control of key Red Sea choke points generated substantial revenue. The kingdom established fortified posts along major shipping lanes and collected taxes from vessels passing through waters under its influence. These customs duties funded royal building projects, military campaigns, and the lavish lifestyle of the Aksumite elite while strengthening the government's financial base. The commercial networks fostered cultural and religious exchange as well. Christianity arrived through these same trade routes, as did Jewish communities that established settlements in the Ethiopian highlands. Buddhist and Hindu artifacts discovered at Aksumite sites suggest contact with South Asian religious traditions. The kingdom's cosmopolitan outlook created an environment where diverse ideas could circulate alongside material goods. Some scholars now argue that Aksum represents the first African empire fully integrated into Eurasian trade networks, achieving this connection centuries before better-known West African kingdoms like Mali and Songhai. This perspective positions Ethiopia not as a peripheral region, but as a central node in the ancient global economy, a forgotten chapter in the early history of globalization. The mighty kingdom of Aksum began to falter around the 7th century CE. Its decline triggered not by a sudden catastrophe, but by a convergence of environmental, economic, and political pressures that slowly eroded its foundations. For centuries, Aksumite prosperity had depended on a delicate balance of factors: fertile agricultural lands, control of trade routes, and military dominance. When these pillars began to crumble, the once powerful empire couldn't sustain itself. Environmental changes struck the first blow. Centuries of intensive agriculture and construction had stripped the northern highlands of their natural forests. Without tree cover, the region's thin topsoil washed away during seasonal rains, diminishing agricultural productivity. Pollen samples from ancient lake beds reveal a dramatic shift in vegetation patterns during this period, suggesting increasingly arid conditions. Farmers who once harvested surplus crops now struggled to feed themselves, undermining the economic base that supported Aksum's elaborate state structure. As the land grew less productive, a revolutionary shift occurred in regional trade patterns. The rapid expansion of Islamic caliphates after 632 CE transformed the commercial landscape Aksum had dominated for centuries. Muslim fleets gained control of Red Sea shipping lanes, while Arab merchants established new trading posts that bypassed Aksumite territories. The port city of Adulis, once the kingdom's commercial lifeblood, declined in importance as trade shifted to Arabian and Persian Gulf harbors. Archaeology confirms this commercial isolation. Aksumite coins disappear from foreign markets, imported goods become scarce in Ethiopian sites, and construction of monumental buildings ceases, all signs of an economy in contraction. Without revenue from international commerce, the kingdom could no longer finance its bureaucracy, military campaigns, or public works. Internal political cohesion fractured under these pressures. Provincial governors and local elites, seeing the central government weakened, began asserting greater autonomy. Inscriptions from this period show increasingly limited royal authority, with monarchs struggling to maintain control beyond the immediate vicinity of the capital. The sophisticated administrative system that had unified diverse territories unraveled as regional power centers emerged. Evidence suggests disease may have compounded these problems. Archaeological findings indicate population decline in urban centers, possibly from pandemic outbreaks. The Justinianic plague, which devastated the Byzantine Empire in the 6th century, may have reached Ethiopia through the same trade networks that had once brought prosperity. Religious transformations throughout the region further isolated Christian Aksum. As neighboring territories converted to Islam, the kingdom found itself surrounded by states that viewed it with suspicion. Christian merchants faced new restrictions in Muslim-controlled ports, while religious differences complicated diplomatic relationships that had once facilitated trade. Facing these mounting challenges, the Aksumite elite made a strategic decision that marked the effective end of the empire while ensuring cultural continuity. Rather than fight a losing battle to maintain control of the northern highlands, they gradually relocated southward into more defensible and agriculturally viable territories. This migration shifted the center of Ethiopian power away from Aksum toward the central highlands of the Lasta and Amara regions. Remarkably, though Aksumite political power faded, its cultural legacy endured. The Ge'ez language continued as the liturgical language of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, preserving Aksumite literature and traditions. Christian practices, architectural styles, and artistic conventions survived the collapse of the state that had sponsored them. Recent scientific research has uncovered another potential factor in Aksum's decline. Evidence of massive volcanic eruptions in the mid-6th century, possibly in Iceland or Southeast Asia, appears in ice core samples worldwide. These eruptions ejected enough ash into the atmosphere to cause several years of global cooling, a volcanic winter that would have devastated harvests across Ethiopia just as the kingdom faced other challenges. This climate catastrophe, affecting regions worldwide, may have delivered the final blow to an already weakened empire. In the centuries after Aksum's decline, Ethiopia entered a period of political fragmentation. Local rulers controlled smaller territories as the Grand Imperial system collapsed. But around 1137 CE, a new dynasty emerged from the highlands of Lasta in north-central Ethiopia. These rulers, known as the Zagwe, established control over much of the former Aksumite territories and revitalized Ethiopia's Christian kingdom after centuries of uncertainty. The Zagwe rulers faced a significant legitimacy challenge from the beginning. They did not claim descent from the old Aksumite kings, who traced their lineage to Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Instead, they came from the Aga ethnic group, previously subjects rather than rulers. To overcome this perceived disadvantage, the Zagwe monarchs emphasized their religious devotion and positioned themselves as guardians of Ethiopia's Christian heritage during a time when Islam was expanding throughout the region. This strategy reached its peak under the dynasty's most famous ruler, King Lalibela, who reigned in the late 12th and early 13th centuries. His name would become permanently associated with Ethiopia's most extraordinary architectural achievement. In the town now bearing his name, Lalibela commissioned the creation of 11 monolithic churches entirely carved from solid volcanic rock. Unlike conventional structures built upward, these churches were created by excavating downward, removing thousands of tons of stone to reveal complete buildings within the living rock. The churches represent an astonishing engineering achievement. Workers cut deep trenches around massive blocks of stone, then hollowed out the interiors to create doors, windows, columns, floors, and ceilings. The largest church, Bet Medhane Elam, measures 33 by 23 meters and stands 11 meters high, all carved from a single piece of rock. Each structure features intricate designs, including arched doorways, window lattices, and interior decoration that required precise planning and execution. Beyond their technical brilliance, the churches reflect a profound religious vision. The complex follows a symbolic layout representing Jerusalem, with a small stream named Jordan River dividing the churches into two main groups. This design wasn't coincidental. Historical records suggest Lalibela created this New Jerusalem after Muslim conquests made pilgrimages to the actual Jerusalem dangerous for Ethiopian Christians. This sacred complex allowed worshippers to symbolically visit the Holy Land without ever leaving Ethiopia. The architectural style reveals Ethiopia's continued connections to distant cultures despite its political isolation. While the basic forms reflect indigenous traditions, elements like cruciform shapes and basilica layouts show Byzantine Christian influence. Some architectural historians have noted features resembling Indian rock-cut temples, suggesting knowledge of Asian building techniques may have reached Ethiopia through remaining trade networks. Throughout the Zagwe period, Ethiopia maintained religious connections with Egypt's Coptic Church, which appointed Ethiopia's top religious leader, the Abuna. This relationship ensured doctrinal continuity with broader Orthodox Christianity, while allowing distinctive Ethiopian practices to develop. The Zagwe kings supported numerous monasteries throughout their territories, where monks preserved ancient religious texts and created new theological works in Ge'ez. These monasteries became centers of learning, art, and manuscript production. Unlike the expansionist Aksumite emperors, Zagwe rulers focused primarily on internal development and cultural reinforcement. They strengthened Ethiopia's Christian identity during a period when Muslim states were expanding throughout Northeast Africa. This inward focus produced cultural flowering, but may have contributed to their eventual downfall as they lacked the military strength to resist challenges from rival claimants. The Church of St. George at Lalibela stands as the dynasty's most recognizable achievement. Carved in the shape of a perfect Greek cross, its construction method continues to puzzle modern engineers. The builders worked from the top down, somehow maintaining perfect proportions without the benefit of modern tools or measuring equipment. Even more intriguing, recent ground-penetrating radar scans suggest the visible churches may connect to a vast network of tunnels and hidden chambers beneath the surface, a subterranean complex whose full extent remains unexplored. In 1270 CE, a pivotal moment in Ethiopian history unfolded when a nobleman named Yakuno Amlak overthrew the last Zagwe king. This wasn't merely a change in leadership. It represented a fundamental shift in how Ethiopia understood its own identity. Yakuno Amlak claimed direct descent from the ancient Aksumite kings and, more importantly, from the biblical King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. With this declaration, he restored what Ethiopians considered the rightful royal lineage after what many viewed as a century-long interruption under the Zagwe. The restoration of the Solomonic line transformed Ethiopian political ideology. While the Zagwe had legitimized their rule through religious devotion and church building, the Solomonic emperors claimed authority through sacred bloodlines. This genealogical connection positioned them not just as secular rulers, but as divinely ordained monarchs with direct biblical sanction. The emperor became more than a king. He was seen as the anointed of God, a messianic figure responsible for protecting both the state and the church. Yakuno Amlak moved quickly to consolidate his power. He launched military campaigns against regional lords who had enjoyed relative autonomy during the fragmented post-Aksumite period. These conquests expanded imperial territory and brought previously independent regions under centralized control. The new emperor also strengthened his position by forming alliances with the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which officially recognized the legitimacy of his Solomonic lineage. The dynasty established new systems of aristocratic hierarchy to maintain control over its territories. They granted land to loyal supporters through a complex system called gult rights, which allowed nobles to collect taxes from peasants in exchange for military service to the crown. This feudal arrangement created layers of obligation that bound local elites to the throne, while reinforcing social stratification throughout the kingdom. Under Solomonic patronage, the royal court became a center for historical writing and myth-making. Court chroniclers produced elaborate genealogies tracing the emperor's lineage back to Solomon, while theologians developed religious texts supporting imperial ideology. The most important of these works was the Kebra Nagast, Glory of Kings, compiled in the 14th century. This remarkable text blended biblical narratives, Aksumite legends, and political theory into a national epic that justified Solomonic rule as divinely ordained. The Kebra Nagast recounted how Solomon and the Queen of Sheba produced a son named Menelik, who traveled to Jerusalem, secretly took the Ark of the Covenant, and brought it to Ethiopia. This narrative positioned Ethiopia as the new Israel and its emperors as guardians of the true faith. The text transformed the dynastic claim into a sacred mission, giving Ethiopian national identity a religious foundation that persisted for centuries. The Solomonic rulers strengthened Ethiopia's religious connections with the wider Christian world, particularly with the Coptic Patriarchate of Alexandria, which consecrated Ethiopia's bishops. This relationship enhanced the kingdom's international standing while allowing it to maintain its distinctive religious practices, creating a uniquely Ethiopian form of Orthodox Christianity. One of the dynasty's most distinctive governance practices was the tradition of mobile kingship. Rather than ruling from a fixed capital, Solomonic emperors traveled throughout their territories with a massive royal camp that functioned as a moving city. This approach allowed the monarch to personally monitor distant provinces, collect taxes directly, and prevent any single region from becoming too powerful. Some emperors were crowned in ceremonies shrouded in such secrecy that only a handful of high priests knew the exact location, heightening the mystical aura surrounding the monarchy. The restoration of the Solomonic line in 1270 established a dynasty that would claim continuous rule until Emperor Haile Selassie's overthrow in 1974, making it one of history's longest-lasting royal houses. For nearly 7 centuries, despite periods of weakness and fragmentation, the Solomonic claim provided a thread of continuity in Ethiopian political life, connecting ancient biblical narratives to modern national identity. The relative peace of Ethiopia's Christian kingdom was shattered in the early 16th century by one of Africa's most devastating religious conflicts. In 1529, a military leader named Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi launched a campaign against the Ethiopian Empire that would transform the region forever. Ahmad, commonly known as Gragn or the Left-Handed, led forces from the Muslim Adal Sultanate based in what is now eastern Ethiopia and Somalia. This wasn't merely a territorial dispute, but a full-scale religious war. Ahmad Gragn declared his campaign a jihad against the Christian highlands, mobilizing fighters motivated by both religious zeal and the promise of plunder from Ethiopia's wealthy monasteries and churches. What made this conflict particularly devastating was the technological advantage employed by Adal's forces. The Ottoman Empire had supplied Ahmad with firearms, cannon, and trained musketeers, weapons that Ethiopian defenders had never encountered. Ethiopian Emperor Lebna Dangle initially dismissed the threat, confident in his mountainous kingdom's history of repelling invaders. This miscalculation proved catastrophic. Ahmad's forces employed innovative tactics, using smaller, mobile units that could navigate difficult terrain while avoiding direct confrontation with larger Ethiopian armies. When battles did occur, Ottoman-supplied firearms gave Ahmad's fighters a decisive advantage against Ethiopian warriors armed primarily with spears and swords. By the mid-1530s, Ahmad had captured and burned the ancient city of Aksum, sacked countless churches and monasteries, and seized control of approximately 2/3 of the Ethiopian highlands. Emperor Lebna Dangle abandoned his royal court and fled into remote mountain strongholds with his remaining supporters. Christian communities throughout the conquered territories faced a terrible choice: convert to Islam, pay tribute, or face destruction. The war introduced gunpowder weapons to interior Africa on an unprecedented scale. Ethiopian chronicles describe the terror inspired by these new weapons. The smoke, noise, and deadly accuracy of Ottoman firearms convinced many that they had faced supernatural powers. This technological revolution changed warfare throughout the Horn of Africa, as surviving kingdoms scrambled to acquire similar weapons. With his empire crumbling, Lebna Dangle sent desperate appeals to Portugal, a rising European power that had established outposts along Africa's eastern coast. The Portuguese, concerned about Ottoman expansion and motivated by the prospect of finding Prester John, a legendary Christian ruler they believed ruled in Africa, responded to the Ethiopian plea. In 1541, a small Portuguese expedition arrived with 400 musketeers, led by Cristóvão da Gama, son of the famous explorer Vasco da Gama. The arrival of Portuguese forces balanced the technological scales. Though initially defeated in several engagements, the combined Ethiopian-Portuguese force gradually maintained momentum. The tide turned decisively at the Battle of Wainadaga in February 1543, where Ahmad Gragn was killed by a Portuguese musket shot. Without their charismatic leader, the Adal forces gradually retreated, though fighting continued for years afterward. Ethiopian tradition includes a curious detail about this battle. Some chronicles claim Ahmad possessed a magical book that protected him from bullets, until a Portuguese soldier allegedly stole it shortly before the battle, leaving him vulnerable. This legend reflects how Ethiopians understood the sudden shift in military fortune. The war left Ethiopia physically devastated. Countless churches lay in ruins, irreplaceable manuscripts and artwork were destroyed, and agricultural systems collapsed, leading to widespread famine. More fundamentally, the conflict shattered the Ethiopian imperial myth of invincibility. For centuries, Ethiopian emperors had claimed divine protection based on their Solomonic lineage. The near conquest by Ahmad's forces undermined this ideology and weakened imperial authority. Portuguese soldiers who participated in the campaign were astonished to discover an ancient Christian kingdom in Africa's interior, with its own distinctive traditions predating many European Christian kingdoms. Their accounts describe amazement at Ethiopia's complex rituals, unique architectural styles, and religious practices that differed significantly from European Christianity. The Ahmad-Gragn War remained embedded in Ethiopian consciousness for centuries, influencing religious attitudes and intercommunal relations between Christians and Muslims long after the conflict ended. The Portuguese soldiers who helped defeat Ahmad-Gragn didn't leave Ethiopia after the war ended. They established a permanent presence, bringing with them not just military expertise, but Jesuit missionaries determined to convert Ethiopia to Roman Catholicism. These Jesuits viewed Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity as a corrupted version of the faith that needed correction, despite the fact it had existed for over 1,000 years. Initially, the Jesuits made little progress. Ethiopian Orthodox traditions were deeply embedded in the culture, and most emperors resisted attempts to change ancient practices. The breakthrough came with the arrival of Pedro Páez in 1603, a Spanish Jesuit with exceptional diplomatic skills. Unlike earlier missionaries who criticized Ethiopian traditions directly, Páez learned Ge'ez, studied Ethiopian religious texts, and gained the trust of Emperor Za-Dangal and later Emperor Susenyos I. Páez and other Jesuits documented Ethiopia's geography, customs, and history with remarkable detail. Their writings included the first European descriptions of the source of the Blue Nile, which Páez visited in 1618. These accounts provided Europe with its first accurate information about Ethiopia's interior, correcting centuries of fantastical myths about Prester John's kingdom. The religious situation reached a critical point under Emperor Susenyos I. After years of theological discussions with Páez, Susenyos officially converted to Roman Catholicism in 1622. He then took the extraordinary step of trying to convert the entire Ethiopian Orthodox Church to Catholic practices. The emperor banned traditional Ethiopian religious customs, ordered priests to adopt Catholic rituals, and declared the Pope, not the Alexandrian Patriarch, as the head of Ethiopia's church. This religious revolution triggered immediate backlash. The Orthodox clergy, who had maintained Ethiopian religious traditions for centuries, fiercely opposed these foreign changes. For common Ethiopians, the imposed practices represented not just religious change, but an attack on their cultural identity. Catholic customs like communion with unleavened bread, changes to the Ethiopian calendar, and the abandonment of traditional circumcision practices felt like foreign impositions rather than spiritual improvements. Resistance quickly turned violent. Between 1626 and 1632, a series of rebellions broke out across Ethiopia. Orthodox priests and monks led local communities in armed resistance against imperial forces. In some regions, the conflicts resembled civil war as loyalist troops battled rebels defending traditional religious practices. The death toll mounted as Susenyos ruthlessly suppressed these uprisings. According to Ethiopian chronicles, one battle alone in Lasta region resulted in over 8,000 deaths of those opposing the religious changes. As the conflicts continued, even members of the royal family began questioning the wisdom of the emperor's religious policy. By 1632, Susenyos recognized the unsustainable nature of this position. Facing widespread rebellion and the possibility of losing his throne entirely, he made a dramatic decision. The emperor abdicated in favor of his son, Fasilides, who immediately reversed his father's religious policies. One of Fasilides' first acts was to restore Ethiopian Orthodoxy as the state religion and expel all Jesuit missionaries from the kingdom. This rejection of European influence led to a new era of deliberate isolation. Emperor Fasilides established a new capital at Gondar and implemented policies restricting foreign access to Ethiopia. Foreign missionaries were banned, diplomatic contacts were limited, and Ethiopia turned inward for nearly 2 centuries. This isolationist stance protected Ethiopian culture and religious independence, but gradually disconnected the kingdom from technological and political developments in the wider world. The Jesuit period left a complex legacy. While their attempt to convert Ethiopia failed, Jesuit writings preserved invaluable information about Ethiopian history and geography. Their detailed accounts of religious practices, political structures, and cultural traditions provide some of our most important historical sources for this period. Among these accounts were tantalizing references to supposedly lost biblical texts preserved only in Ethiopian monasteries, claims that would fuel European fascination with Ethiopia for centuries to come. Following his father's disastrous experiment with Catholicism, Emperor Fasilides made a decision in 1636 that would transform Ethiopia. He established a permanent capital at Gondar, abandoning the centuries-old tradition of mobile royal courts that had defined Ethiopian governance. This shift marked the beginning of the Gondarine period, a remarkable era of architectural innovation and cultural flowering that would last until the mid-18th century. Gondar's most striking feature was its stone castles, unlike anything previously seen in sub-Saharan Africa. Fasilides constructed a royal compound known as Fasil Gebi, surrounded by high stone walls with 12 gates. Within this fortress, he built a multi-story castle with round turrets, arched doorways, and ornate window decorations. Subsequent emperors added their own structures, creating a complex of palaces and reception halls that blended indigenous Ethiopian building techniques with elements borrowed from Portuguese, Ottoman, and even Indian architecture. These buildings represented more than just royal residences. They signified a fundamental transformation in how Ethiopian rulers projected power. Unlike their predecessors, who demonstrated authority through constant movement, Gondarine emperors created a fixed urban center where officials, clergy, foreign visitors, and merchants gathered around the imperial presence. The stone palaces physically embodied the permanence and strength of imperial rule in a way that temporary royal camps never could. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church flourished under Gondarine patronage. After expelling the Jesuits, Fasilides reinforced Orthodox institutions, funding new churches and monasteries throughout his territories. The most magnificent of these, Debre Berhan Selassie Church, still stands today, famous for its ceiling painted with hundreds of winged angel faces. The church became deeply integrated into imperial administration, with clergy serving as judges, record keepers, and advisors to the throne. Gondar developed into a center of artistic production and religious scholarship. Monasteries operated scriptoria, where monks produced illuminated manuscripts of religious texts, including psalters, gospels, and saints' lives. These works displayed a distinctive Gondarine style, with vibrant colors, stylized human figures, and decorative patterns that combine traditional Ethiopian motifs with new artistic influences. Musicians composed complex liturgical chants and hymns that enhanced Orthodox worship, while poets crafted works celebrating imperial achievements. The city hosted elaborate court ceremonies that reinforced imperial prestige. During major religious festivals like Timkat or Epiphany, emperors participated in processions featuring thousands of clergy, nobles, and soldiers. These rituals displayed the harmonious relationship between throne and altar, while impressing foreign visitors with Ethiopian cultural sophistication. Despite this cultural flowering, the Gondarine period witnessed gradual political decentralization. Provincial nobles gained increasing autonomy, establishing regional power bases while maintaining nominal loyalty to the emperor. This feudalization accelerated after the reign of Emperor Ieyasu I from 1682 to 1706, as successive rulers struggled to maintain central authority over ambitious regional lords. Royal patronage sustained distinctive art forms throughout this period. Painters developed techniques for creating religious icons on parchment, wood, and cloth, depicting biblical scenes and Ethiopian saints with distinctive stylistic conventions. Wall paintings in churches combined religious imagery with scenes from Ethiopian history and folklore, creating visual narratives that reinforce national identity. European travelers who reached Gondar in the 18th century were astonished to find stone castles in the African highlands, leading some to call it the Camelot of Africa. These visitors documented Gondarine court life and religious practices, providing valuable historical records of the kingdom's cultural achievements. Recent archaeological investigations have revealed unexpected aspects of Gondar's royal compound. Ground-penetrating radar surveys have identified previously unknown subterranean chambers beneath several castles, suggesting the existence of hidden passages, storage rooms, and possibly royal treasuries. These discoveries hint at secret dimensions of Gondarine court life, perhaps spaces for confidential councils, secure archives for imperial records, or crypts containing royal burials that remain unexplored beneath the surface of Ethiopia's castle city. The grandeur of Gondar's royal courts gave way to one of Ethiopia's most turbulent periods, beginning around 1769. This era, known as Zemene Mesafint, or the Age of Princes, marked a profound disintegration of central authority that would last nearly a century. The imperial throne continued to exist in Gondar, but real power shifted decisively to regional warlords who controlled territory, armies, and resources, while emperors became mere figureheads in elaborate coronation ceremonies. The fragmentation began when powerful nobles, particularly those bearing the title of Ras, roughly equivalent to duke or general, realized they could install and remove emperors at will. These military governors maintained the facade of imperial continuity while exercising actual control from behind the throne. Some emperors during this period ruled for mere months or weeks before being replaced by another puppet chosen by whichever faction temporarily gained the upper hand. Ethiopia fractured into a mosaic of competing territories with shifting boundaries. Major regions like Tigray in the north, Amhara in the central highlands, and the emerging power of Shewa to the south functioned as independent states. These regions engaged in constant warfare against each other, forming temporary alliances that dissolved as quickly as they formed. The political landscape changed constantly as military leaders gained and lost territory through conquest or betrayal. The Oromo people, who had been expanding into the Central Highlands since the 16th century, emerged as the significant political players during this period. Oromo leaders established their own states and dynasties, sometimes adopting elements of Highland political culture while maintaining distinct identities. This era saw increased ethnic mixing and cultural exchange, despite the political chaos and frequent conflicts. Throughout this fragmentation, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church remained a crucial unifying institution. Monasteries and churches continued to operate across political boundaries, maintaining cultural continuity when political unity had collapsed. The church provided a common religious identity that transcended regional loyalties, and clergy often served as mediators between warring factions. Regional warlords sought legitimacy through church-sanctioned coronations, acknowledging the religious foundation of Ethiopian political authority, even while undermining its centralized expression. The chaos of the Zemene Mesafint wasn't entirely destructive. Regional courts developed distinctive architectural styles, legal traditions, and artistic expressions. Local oral histories flourished as different regions emphasized their particular contributions to Ethiopian identity. Craftsmen created regional variations of religious art, and musicians composed war songs celebrating local heroes and victories. Ethiopia's previous connections with the outside world withered during this period. European envoys who attempted to establish diplomatic relations found it nearly impossible to determine who actually governed the country. Some visitors reported meeting multiple individuals claiming imperial authority in different regions. The country turned inward, focusing on internal power struggles rather than external relationships. The fracturing of Ethiopia was so complete that European cartographers began redrawing their maps. Several European atlases from the early 19th century entirely omitted the Ethiopian Empire as a unified entity, instead labeling the region as separate, quote, kingdoms of the Gala and Tigray. For much of the world, Ethiopia had ceased to exist as a coherent nation-state. Multiple regional leaders attempted to reunify the empire throughout this period. The rulers of Tigray temporarily gained supremacy, then warlords from Amhara, then chiefs from other regions, but none managed to establish lasting control over the entire highlands. Each conquest was followed by new rebellions and fragmentations. The Age of Princes finally began to close with the emergence of a military leader named Kasa Haile from the northwestern region of Kwara. Beginning as a minor noble with a small following, Kasa gradually defeated rival warlords and expanded his territory through superior military tactics and strategic alliances. By 1855, he had gained sufficient power to have himself crowned Emperor Tewodros II, marking the beginning of Ethiopia's imperial reunification and the end of the Zemene Mesafint's chaotic century. From the fragmented landscape of the Zemene Mesafint emerged an unlikely unifier. Kasa Haile, a minor nobleman from the northwestern region of Kwara, rose through military conquests and strategic marriages to amass considerable power. In 1855, after defeating his rivals in a series of decisive battles, he crowned himself Emperor Tewodros II, a name he deliberately chose from an ancient prophecy that foretold a ruler named Tewodros would restore Ethiopia's greatness. Tewodros approached his rule with messianic intensity. He viewed himself not simply as another emperor, but as Ethiopia's divinely appointed savior, destined to rebuild what the Age of Princes had destroyed. Where his predecessors had accepted fragmentation, Tewodros demanded total submission from regional lords. Those who resisted faced brutal consequences. He executed rebellious nobles, burned their strongholds, and confiscated their lands to demonstrate the costs of defiance. The new emperor recognized that military modernization was essential for Ethiopia's survival. He established the first standing national army loyal to the throne rather than regional warlords. His most ambitious military project was creating European-style artillery. When he couldn't acquire modern weapons from abroad, he employed missionary craftsmen to establish foundries where Ethiopian workers melted down church bells to produce massive cannons. Though primitive by European standards, these weapons symbolized his determination to transform Ethiopia into a modern state. Tewodros constructed the mountain fortress at Magdala as his administrative center. Perched on an elevated plateau with steep cliffs on all sides, this stronghold served as treasury, prison, arsenal, and palace. The site reflected his strategic thinking, a defensible position from which to govern a still fractious kingdom where rebellion remained a constant threat. The emperor's modernization plans required foreign expertise, particularly from Britain. He wrote to Queen Victoria requesting technical assistance, but diplomatic misunderstandings and the slow pace of communication meant his letters received no meaningful response. Frustrated by what he perceived as deliberate disrespect, Tewodros imprisoned several British envoys and missionaries in 1864, inadvertently triggering an international crisis. Britain responded with overwhelming force. In 1868, a massive expeditionary force under General Robert Napier landed on the Red Sea coast and marched inland with 32,000 men, including troops from British India. The logistical operation was unprecedented. Engineers built roads through mountain passes, while teams of elephants transported heavy artillery. When British forces reached Magdala and demonstrated their superior firepower, Tewodros realized defeat was inevitable. Rather than surrender, he took his own life with a pistol that had been a gift from Queen Victoria. Despite his dramatic downfall, Tewodros left a significant legacy. He introduced Ethiopia's first centralized tax system, established a uniform legal code to replace regional laws, and built roads and bridges to connect previously isolated regions. His vision of a unified, modernized Ethiopia inspired subsequent rulers who completed the work he began. Tewodros's relationship with the Ethiopian Orthodox Church was contentious. He attempted to limit church landholdings and reduce clerical privileges, demanding that priests focus on spiritual matters rather than accumulating wealth. These policies made him enemies among religious elites who had prospered during the decentralized Zemene Mesafint. Among Tewodros's more unusual ambitions was his desire to build an Ethiopian navy. Despite being a landlocked country, he requested a ship from Queen Victoria, demonstrating both his grand vision and limited understanding of geopolitical realities. The British victory at Magdala resulted in widespread looting of Ethiopian treasures. Soldiers seized golden crowns, illuminated manuscripts, and sacred relics that ended up in British museums and private collections. Many of these artifacts remain in Britain today, including remarkable manuscripts now held in the British Library, physical reminders of Ethiopia's first modern emperor and his fateful encounter with European colonialism. The coronation of Emperor Menelik II in 1889 marked the beginning of a new chapter in Ethiopian history. Unlike his predecessors, who struggled merely to maintain control over the traditional highland territories, Menelik embarked on an ambitious campaign of expansion that would create the borders of modern Ethiopia. Through a combination of military campaigns, strategic marriages, and diplomatic maneuvering, he incorporated vast regions that had previously existed as independent kingdoms or loose confederations. The territories Menelik brought under Ethiopian rule included the rich agricultural lands of Oromia, the coffee-producing regions of Sidama, the Kingdom of Woleta in the southwest, and portions of Somali territory in the east. These conquests more than doubled Ethiopia's size and incorporated diverse peoples with their own languages, cultures, and political systems into what became a multi-ethnic empire. Menelik understood that territorial expansion alone wouldn't create a functioning state. He initiated modernization projects that transformed Ethiopia's infrastructure and administration. The emperor introduced telegraphs that connected distant provinces to the capital, built roads for improved commerce and troop movements, established the country's first newspaper through imported printing presses, and created a professional standing army equipped with modern firearms purchased from European suppliers. While Menelik acquired European technology, he carefully maintained Ethiopian sovereignty. He played competing European powers against each other, accepting technical advisors from France while purchasing weapons from Italy, Britain, and Russia. This balanced approach allowed Ethiopia to modernize without becoming dependent on any single foreign power. The emperor's diplomatic skills were tested by the 1889 Treaty of Wakale with Italy. The treaty, written in both Amharic and Italian, contained a critical discrepancy. The Amharic version described a relationship where Ethiopia could use Italy as an intermediary for foreign relations if it chose to, while the Italian version claimed Ethiopia was obligated to conduct all foreign affairs through Italy, effectively making it an Italian protectorate. When Menelik discovered this deception, he repudiated the treaty, leading to escalating tensions with Italy. The conflict culminated in 1896 when Italian forces invaded from their colony in Eritrea. Menelik mobilized a massive army of approximately 100,000 soldiers from across his newly unified territories. The decisive battle occurred at Adwa on March 1, 1896, where Ethiopian forces outmaneuvered and overwhelmed the Italian army. The Battle of Adwa ended with approximately 7,000 Italian soldiers killed and another 1,500 captured, forcing Italy to abandon its colonial ambitions in Ethiopia. This victory resonated far beyond Ethiopia's borders. It represented the first time an African nation had decisively defeated a European colonial power on the battlefield, challenging the prevailing European narrative about African inferiority. News of the victory spread worldwide, with European newspapers describing Menelik as a Black Napoleon. Congratulatory messages arrived from leaders across the globe, including African American activists, the Pope, and even the Russian Tsar. Menelik established Addis Ababa, or New Flower, as Ethiopia's permanent capital, strategically located near the geographical center of its expanded realm. The city grew from a military encampment to a proper capital with foreign embassies, government buildings, and modern amenities. He instituted centralized taxation, minted Ethiopia's first domestically produced currency, and reformed the imperial court to incorporate bureaucratic functions necessary for governing a larger territory. Among Menelik's lesser-known initiatives was his promotion of public health measures, particularly mass smallpox vaccination campaigns. He ordered vaccines imported and administered throughout Ethiopia decades before such comprehensive programs became common in many European countries. This forward-thinking approach to public health demonstrated his practical vision for modernization. Despite these achievements, Menelik's expansion created lasting internal tensions. The incorporation of southern territories often involved violence and subjugation, creating hierarchies that privileged highland Christians over newly conquered peoples. These power imbalances established during his reign would continue to shape Ethiopian politics into the modern era, generating ethnic divisions that remain unresolved to this day. The transformation of Ethiopia into a modern state took shape under the leadership of a man born as Ras Tafari Makonnen. When he ascended to the throne as Emperor Haile Selassie I in 1930, he embodied two seemingly contradictory visions: the ancient imperial traditions stretching back to Solomon and the urgent need for modernization in a rapidly changing world. His coronation itself reflected this duality, combining ancient Ethiopian Orthodox rituals with modern diplomatic protocols as representatives from major world powers attended the ceremony. Selassie recognized that Ethiopia's survival required formal governmental structures beyond traditional imperial rule. In 1931, he introduced Ethiopia's first written constitution, creating a bicameral parliament while carefully preserving ultimate authority for the crown. This document represented a calculated step toward modern governance without surrendering the emperor's traditional powers, balancing act that had characterized much of his reign. Education formed the cornerstone of Selassie's modernization program. He expanded Ethiopia's school system dramatically, establishing the first secondary schools and sending promising students abroad to gain technical knowledge. The emperor personally attended graduation ceremonies, emphasizing education's importance to national development. His efforts created the first generation of Western-educated Ethiopian professionals, though schooling remained concentrated among elite families from highland regions. Selassie also reorganized Ethiopia's legal system, introducing standardized codes and establishing secular courts alongside traditional ones. He rebuilt the military with professional training and modern equipment, constructed highways connecting isolated regions, and commissioned Africa's first international airline. These initiatives aimed to strengthen central authority while presenting Ethiopia as a modernizing nation deserving respect from global powers. Ethiopia's entry into the League of Nations in 1923, while Selassie was still regent, marked his commitment to international diplomacy. The emperor saw membership in global institutions as protection against colonial ambitions. This strategy faced its greatest test when Italy invaded Ethiopia in 1935. Selassie delivered a prophetic address to the League of Nations, warning that Ethiopia's fate foretold dangers facing all small nations if aggression went unchallenged. His warning proved accurate as appeasement policies ultimately failed to prevent World War II. Domestically, Selassie's reform generated resistance from conservative forces. Landed nobles opposed changes to traditional property arrangements, while Orthodox clergy viewed secular education with suspicion. The emperor navigated these tensions carefully, sometimes slowing reforms to maintain elite support, while using his personal authority to push modernization forward when possible. Beyond Ethiopia's borders, Selassie acquired unexpected significance as a symbol of Black independence and dignity. The Rastafarian movement in Jamaica interpreted biblical prophecies as referring to him, viewing his coronation as fulfillment of predictions about a Redeemer king from Africa. While Selassie himself never encouraged these beliefs, his symbolic importance among African diaspora communities demonstrated Ethiopia's unique position in global Black consciousness. The emperor's later foreign policy emphasized Pan-African unity and non-alignment during the Cold War. He played a central role in establishing the Organization of African Unity in 1963, with headquarters in Addis Ababa, positioning Ethiopia as a diplomatic center for the continent. Small details reveal Selassie's complex character. British officials noted with amazement that when he fled into exile during the Italian occupation, his court carried 27 tons of gold and historical manuscripts, preserving Ethiopia's cultural heritage even in defeat. His personal lion named Buddy roamed palace grounds during official functions, reinforcing ancient symbolic connections between Ethiopian kingship and the conquering Lion of Judah title Selassie inherited. Though eventually overthrown in 1974, Haile Selassie's lengthy reign represented Ethiopia's determined effort to preserve independence through selective modernization while maintaining distinctive national identity in a world increasingly dominated by foreign powers and ideologies. On October 3, 1935, the skies over Ethiopia filled with Italian aircraft as Benito Mussolini launched his invasion. The fascist dictator had long dreamed of avenging Italy's humiliating defeat at Adwa in 1896 and establishing a new Roman Empire across East Africa. When his mechanized forces crossed the border, they confronted an Ethiopian army that fought bravely but was outmatched in terms of modern weaponry and air power. The warfare that followed was exceptionally brutal. Italian commanders employed chemical weapons, particularly mustard gas, against both military and civilian targets. These poisonous clouds descended on villages, guerrilla fighters, and even medical facilities, a flagrant violation of the Geneva Protocol which Italy had signed. Photographs from the period show Ethiopian soldiers with chemical burns covering their bodies, their skin blistered and raw from exposure to these illegal weapons. When Ethiopia appealed to the League of Nations for help, the international response proved hollow. Member states imposed economic sanctions on Italy, but these carefully excluded vital war materials like oil. Britain and France, fearful of pushing Mussolini closer to Hitler, refused to close the Suez Canal to Italian shipping. This diplomatic abandonment left Ethiopia essentially fighting alone against a European power. Emperor Haile Selassie delivered an impassioned speech at the League headquarters in Geneva, warning the world about the dangers of appeasing aggressors. His words proved prophetic. Quote, "It is us today, it will be you tomorrow." When Italian forces captured Addis Ababa in May 1936, the emperor was forced to flee into exile in Britain, where he continued to advocate for Ethiopia's freedom and became an international symbol of resistance to fascism. The occupation that followed revealed the true face of Italian colonialism. In February 1937, following an assassination attempt against Viceroy Rodolfo Graziani, Italian authorities launched a 3-day massacre known as Yekkatit 12. Thousands of Ethiopian civilians were killed in Addis Ababa alone. Italian soldiers and fascist blackshirts moved through neighborhoods, burning homes, and executing residents regardless of age or gender. Despite overwhelming odds, Ethiopian resistance never died. The Arbagnok, or Patriots, maintained control of roughly 1/3 of the country throughout the occupation. These fighters conducted raids on Italian outposts, sabotaged infrastructure, and kept communication networks alive in the highlands and remote areas. Their guerrilla tactics tied down thousands of Italian troops and prevented Mussolini from ever fully controlling the country. Ethiopia's liberation came during World War II, when British and Commonwealth forces, alongside Ethiopian patriots, launched a campaign against Italian East Africa in 1941. As Allied forces advanced, Ethiopian fighters emerged from hiding and joined the offensive. By May, Haile Selassie returned triumphantly to Addis Ababa, reclaiming his throne exactly 5 years after going into exile. The trauma of invasion and occupation transformed Ethiopian politics. The experience instilled a fierce sense of nationalism, heightened military awareness, and deep suspicion of foreign powers that would influence government policy for decades. It also exposed the weakness of international institutions and collective security, lessons that shaped Ethiopia's post-war approach to foreign relations. Many Ethiopian treasures looted during the occupation took decades to return. Most notably, the massive obelisk of Aksum, a 1,700-year-old stele standing 79 feet tall, was dismantled and shipped to Rome as a war trophy. It remained in Italy until 2005, when it was finally returned and re-erected in its original location. Recently declassified Italian documents revealed just how ambitious Mussolini's colonial vision had been. Detailed plans showed a permanent settler colony with extensive infrastructure networks, railways, highways, and industrial zones spanning from Eritrea to Kenya. Italian families would occupy the fertile highlands, while Ethiopians would be relegated to less productive regions. These plans for permanent occupation were only thwarted by the persistence of Ethiopian resistance and the larger global conflict that ultimately ended Italy's imperial ambitions. On September 12, 1974, the world witnessed the end of one of history's oldest continuous monarchies. Low-ranking military officers coordinated a coup that removed Emperor Haile Selassie from power after 44 years on the throne. This group, which called itself the Derg, meaning Committee in Amharic, initially presented itself as a force for democratic reform. But within months, the movement transformed into a hardline Marxist-Leninist regime led by the ruthless Colonel Mengistu Haile Mariam. The Derg dismantled the entire imperial system with remarkable speed. They abolished the monarchy, nationalized all land and major industries, and eventually renamed the country the People's Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. Their campaign called for Ethiopia Tikdem, or Ethiopia First, but their vision of Ethiopia bore little resemblance to its past. Landlords lost their holdings overnight, churches lost their extensive properties, and businesses fell under state control. The fate of the former emperor symbolized the regime's brutality. After being detained in the palace, Haile Selassie died under mysterious circumstances in August 1975. The official story claimed he died from natural causes following medical treatment, but evidence later revealed he was likely suffocated on Mengistu's orders. His body was secretly buried beneath a toilet in the palace grounds, where it remained until being discovered in 1992. By 1977, power struggles within the revolutionary movement led to the period known as the Red Terror. The Derg targeted the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Party, or EPRP, and other Marxist groups that challenged Mengistu's authority. Security forces and civilian militias received orders to eliminate counter-revolutionaries by any means necessary. They conducted house-to-house searches, established neighborhood tribunals, and filled prisons with suspected opponents. The violence reached horrifying levels. Victims were tortured in makeshift detention centers across Addis Ababa and other cities. Bodies appeared on streets each morning as warnings, often with signs declaring them counter-revolutionaries. Parents had to pay for the bullets used to execute their children before being allowed to collect their bodies. Conservative estimates suggest 30,000 people died during this period, though some scholars place that number much higher. The Derg formed close alliances with the Soviet Union and Cuba, receiving weapons, military advisors, and economic assistance. When neighboring Somalia invaded the Ogaden region in 1977, Soviet and Cuban forces helped Ethiopia repel the attack. Ethiopia became a critical Cold War proxy state, with approximately 17,000 Cuban troops stationed in the country and billions in Soviet military aid flowing in. Despite this support, the Derg's economic policies proved disastrous. Their massive resettlement program forcibly relocated hundreds of thousands of people from the northern highlands to the southern regions. The collectivization of agriculture destroyed traditional farming systems. These policies, combined with drought, triggered the catastrophic 1983 to 1985 famine that killed an estimated 400,000 to 1 million Ethiopians. The international response included the Live Aid concert, which raised unprecedented humanitarian funds, but couldn't address the political causes of the famine. Throughout the 1980s, ethnic-based insurgencies gained strength in multiple regions. The Tigray People's Liberation Front, or TPLF, established control in the north, while the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, or EPLF, fought for independence. These groups eventually coordinated their efforts against the regime. As Soviet support disappeared with the end of the Cold War, the Derg's military position weakened dramatically. The psychological warfare employed by the regime revealed its true nature. During the Red Terror, Derg operatives marked homes targeted for raids with red paint or even blood. Families were forced to publicly denounce relatives before executions. Mengistu himself once smashed bottles filled with red liquid, symbolizing blood, in Revolutionary Square to demonstrate how revolution would purify itself of enemies. By the time rebel forces finally entered Addis Ababa in May 1991, they found a country traumatized by 17 years of ideological violence and economic collapse. When the rebels rolled into Addis Ababa in May 1991, they brought with them a revolutionary vision for Ethiopia's future. The Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, or EPRDF, a coalition dominated by the Tigray People's Liberation Front, or TPLF, quickly established a transitional government that promised a complete break from both Imperial and Derg systems. Meles Zenawi, the intellectual TPLF leader with piercing eyes and a reserved demeanor, emerged as the architect of this new Ethiopia. Zenawi's government introduced an experimental system that few countries had attempted: ethnic federalism. The 1995 constitution divided Ethiopia into 9 regions based primarily on ethno-linguistic lines. Each region received substantial autonomy over local affairs, including the right to use regional languages in education and administration. Most remarkably, Article 39 of the Constitution granted each ethnic region the theoretical right to secede from Ethiopia entirely, a provision found in very few constitutions worldwide. The federal structure aimed to address Ethiopia's historical problem of ethnic marginalization. For centuries, critics argued, Amhara elites had dominated other ethnic groups. The EPRDF promised a more equitable distribution of power and resources. However, this ethnic-based governance model contained inherent contradictions. While celebrating diversity, it also hardened ethnic identities that had often been fluid throughout Ethiopian history. Economically, the EPRDF embraced development strategies that surprised many observers. Despite their Marxist origins, they implemented market-oriented reforms that attracted foreign investment. Ethiopia built industrial parks, hydroelectric dams, and a modern railway connecting Addis Ababa to Djibouti. Under Zenawi's leadership, GDP growth regularly exceeded 10% annually for over a decade, making Ethiopia one of Africa's fastest-growing economies. The visible signs of this growth appeared everywhere in the capital. Glass skyscrapers transformed the sky, light rail systems cut through urban neighborhoods, and businesses flourished. The government invested heavily in agricultural productivity, road networks, and educational expansion. Poverty rates decreased significantly, though millions still struggled with food insecurity and limited economic opportunities. But this economic miracle came with significant political constraints. The EPRDF maintained tight control over the media, civil society, and political opposition. Elections regularly delivered overwhelming victories for the ruling coalition, raising serious concerns about their fairness. The 2005 elections proved particularly contentious when opposition parties gained unprecedented support. The government's violent crackdown on post-election protests left nearly 200 people dead and thousands arrested. Relations with neighboring Eritrea followed a tragic trajectory. After Eritrea gained independence in 1993 through a peaceful referendum, the two countries maintained close ties. However, border disputes and economic competition led to a devastating war between 1998 and 2000. Approximately 100,000 soldiers died in trench warfare reminiscent of World War I. The conflict ended with a peace agreement, but Ethiopia refused to implement border demarcations, leading to a frozen conflict and militarized frontier for almost 2 decades. Beneath the surface of development and stability, ethnic tensions continued to simmer. In regions with mixed populations, questions about land rights, regional boundaries, and political representation regularly sparked conflicts. Disputes between Somali and Oromo communities in eastern Ethiopia, clashes in the Gambela region, and tensions in multi-ethnic cities reflected the unresolved contradictions of the federal system. When Meles Zenawi died unexpectedly in 2012, the carefully balanced political system he had created began to show cracks. His successor, Haile Mariam Desalegn, lacked Zenawi's authority and political acumen. Beginning in 2015, massive protests erupted in Oromia, Ethiopia's largest region, initially triggered by a controversial Addis Ababa expansion plan. The demonstrations soon spread to Amhara and other regions, reflecting growing frustration with TPLS dominance within the ruling coalition. Behind this political transformation stood one of Africa's most sophisticated surveillance apparatuses. The government trained an estimated 300,000 informants who monitored conversations in neighborhoods, workplaces, and religious institutions. Telephone communications were regularly intercepted, internet access was controlled, and suspected dissidents faced harassment or imprisonment. The irony was clear. A system designed to provide ethnic self-rule had created one of the continent's most intrusive security states. In November 2020, Ethiopia's fragile political balance collapsed entirely. After months of tension between Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's federal government and the regional leadership in Tigray, armed conflict erupted when TPLF forces attacked federal military bases across the northern region. Abiy immediately announced a military response, describing it as a limited operation to restore constitutional order. Few anticipated that this would spiral into Ethiopia's deadliest conflict since the 1998-2000 border war with Eritrea. What started as a confrontation between federal forces and Tigray's regional fighters quickly transformed into something far more complex. Amhara regional forces joined the federal side, eager to reclaim territories they considered historically theirs. More surprisingly, Eritrean troops, former enemies of Ethiopia but longtime adversaries of the TPLF, crossed the border to fight alongside federal forces. The involvement of these multiple actors turned northern Ethiopia into a landscape of overlapping conflicts, with civilians caught in the crossfire. The tactics employed during the war represented a troubling evolution in Ethiopian conflicts. Both sides acquired and deployed advanced weapon systems, including armed drones from Turkey, Iran, and China. These technologies allowed for precision strikes deep behind enemy lines, but also resulted in devastating civilian casualties when used in populated areas. Traditional Ethiopian warfare had typically involved mainly ground forces in remote battle zones, but this conflict brought destruction directly into towns and villages. Perhaps most disturbing was the communication blackout imposed on Tigray. The government severed phone lines, internet connections, and banking services to the entire region. For months, very little information escaped, creating what analysts called an information black hole. When journalists and humanitarian workers eventually gained limited access, they documented widespread atrocities. Massacres of civilians occurred in places like Mai Kadra, Aksum, and Dengolat. Reports from medical facilities indicated systematic sexual violence used as a weapon of war. The conflict exposed the fundamental weaknesses in Ethiopia's ethnic federal system. While fighting raged in Tigray, violence simultaneously intensified in Oromia, where the Oromo Liberation Army insurgency gained strength. Amhara regional forces battled with Kemant militias in the northwest. In Benishangul Gumuz, ethnic violence displaced thousands. This simultaneous eruption of conflicts suggested that Ethiopia's constitutional arrangement had failed to resolve the country's deeper identity questions. International reaction evolved from initial caution to outright condemnation. The United States suspended Ethiopia from trade benefits under the African Growth and Opportunity Act. The European Union froze budget support that had long sustained Ethiopian development projects. African Union mediation efforts faced obstacles from both sides, who maintained maximalist positions through multiple rounds of talks. When Tigrayan forces advanced toward Addis Ababa in late 2021, many predicted the complete collapse of the Ethiopian state. Instead, the federal government launched a successful counteroffensive that pushed TPLF fighters back to Tigray. This military reversal created conditions for the surprise peace agreement signed in Pretoria, South Africa in November 2022. The deal called for the disarmament of Tigrayan forces, restoration of federal authority in Tigray, and accountability for war crimes. The human toll of the conflict proved staggering. Conservative estimates suggest at least 500,000 people died from combat, starvation, and lack of medical care. More than 2.5 million people were displaced from their homes. the conflict devastated northern Ethiopia's economy, with damage to infrastructure estimated at $20 billion. Schools, hospitals, factories, and historic sites suffered deliberate destruction. In a bitter twist of historical irony, Abiy Ahmed had received the Nobel Peace Prize just 1 year before the war began. The award recognized his efforts to end the long-standing conflict with Eritrea in 2018. Critics noted that this same peace deal, made without TPLF involvement despite their central role in the previous war, had enabled Eritrean forces to join the assault on Tigray. Meanwhile, satellite imagery revealed the systematic destruction of cultural landmarks, including the 6th century Debre Damo Monastery and the Al-Najashi Mosque, one of Africa's oldest Islamic sites. These irreplaceable treasures, which had survived centuries of previous conflicts, disappeared from the landscape almost without witness. Ethiopia's 3 million year story isn't just about one nation. It's the story of humanity itself. The challenges it faces today, unity, identity, and progress, are the same ones it's faced for centuries. If you found this journey through time powerful, subscribe for more deep dives into the untold histories that shape our world.